When I told my grown-up children that, at the start of my career in the 1980s, most workers received annual pay increases above the rate of inflation, they didn't believe me. The notion of wage rises just happening without any promotion or change of employer moved from being usual to fanciful inside a single generation. But with Waitrose now hiring HGV drivers on salaries up to £53,000 and average pay across the economy leaping by more than 7%, it is starting to look as if the good old days are returning for the working man and woman. Like Andrew Neil, who addressed this subject on the BBC's Question Time programme on Thursday night, many of us are inclined to regard this as thoroughly good news, even if it might coincide with occasional shortages on shop shelves. I think it's great because with shortage and scarcity, wages are starting to rise again, said Mr. Neil. For the first 2 decades of this century it's been a terrible time if you've just had to live on a wage. Wages stagnated. In real terms they fell. That's all changing now, he added. As he also observed, the average wage for an HGV driver in Britain is around £28,000, which closely matches average earnings overall. It really isn't a lot for a highly responsible job with long and anti-social hours in a country where the average property costs nearly 10 times that. So the kind of pay rises we are now seeing for what are traditionally regarded as working-class jobs should be regarded as a long overdue correction rather than as a threat to the functioning of the economy. The forces of economic globalization, much lauded by the elite, brought about a dire time for many British workers. Campaigning for Brexit brought me into contact with many of those workers. I remember particularly one man who was scratching a living as a minicab driver in Lincolnshire because his previous occupation, agricultural labouring, had not seen an increase in its day rate for over a decade. Working people were caught in a pincer movement. For starters, many companies faced being undercut by competitors in China or other developing economies and therefore simply couldn't afford to give pay rises. On top of that, the UK jobs market became a byword for the oversupply of workers when Tony Blair, allegedly a Labour Prime Minister, threw it open to the whole of Eastern Europe without the transitional controls that other large EU economies imposed. Huge numbers of highly motivated people used to pitiful wages in post-communist countries came to Britain to better themselves, often living half a dozen to a room to keep their costs rock bottom. That's when many big employers began to seriously take advantage. The rise of the 0 hours contract was one example. And let's be honest, it wasn't only the bosses who benefited. So did those with lots of disposable income as a wide range of goods and services became cheaper and less scarce. For those who had significant assets, such as property or shares, there was not a lot to complain about as their value went up and up. But for those who had only their labor to sell at the bottom end of the jobs market, there was a sense of being cut adrift. On another edition of Question Time, back in 2017, an audience member who had voted Remain fretted about the future, demanding Brexiteers explain, who will be serving our coffee in Pret? Who will be selling us sandwiches? She also predicted, you are not going to get English people to take those jobs. 4 years later Costa Coffee clearly doesn't share that view. It has just raised pay 5% for shop staff in a bid to hire 2,000 extra workers by Christmas. It should also be remembered that, despite Brexit, there are still several million EU citizens in Britain who have a right to stay and work here permanently. About another million returned to their countries of origin during the pandemic, but most of them also have the right to resume settled status in the UK too. The idea that ending EU free movement is going to turn Britain into an insular fortress economy simply does not stack up. We are just going a modest way towards rebalancing power in the jobs market between employers and employees. So who will serve us our coffee and for that matter who will drive deliveries to our supermarkets? Hopefully from now on people able to afford a decent standard of life themselves in return.